quick note before we begin today. I'm on the road, as you can see from the various rooms that I'm recording in, and doing my best to maintain technical quality, but as you can see, it's a challenge. I'll be back in my home studio next week and can't wait. Also, today I've done a longer than usual introduction because we get into some pretty complex issues, and I thought that many of you would benefit from having the context and knowing the background. So if you'd rather go straight to the interview with Simcha Rothman today, it starts at about 9 minutes and 15 seconds. Now to the podcast. Those brief clips you just saw and heard are, believe it or not, from proceedings last week in the Israeli Supreme Court. To say it was raucous is an understatement. Members of Knesset, family members of hostages, and those killed on or after October 7, and others were in the packed courtroom. There was yelling, it came close to physical altercations, and basically, it was just a loud and undignified spectacle. Proceedings were halted several times, and various individuals were removed from the courtroom. And much as it pains me to say it, this mayhem is a pretty apt metaphor for the state of Israeli civil society these days. There is so much rage, rancor, and grief, and the stakes are so high for everyone. The court was convened to consider whether the recent firing of Shin Bet head Ronen Bar by the government was done legally. Bar was in office on October 6 and is one of the men responsible for October 7. He has also remained in office since then. And last November, Prime Minister Netanyahu expressed strong confidence in Ronen Bar's ability to continue to serve in his role. That is, until recently, when the latest scandal, Qatargate, broke. What is Qatargate? In short, several spin doctors, who are said to have worked closely with the Prime Minister's office for years, are alleged to have received payments from Qatar. Now that, in and of itself, is not illegal, but it is further alleged that they did so at the direction of Prime Minister Netanyahu's office, and that the work they did related to those payments was intended to burnish the Qatari standing and reputation geopolitically. Furthermore, it was to burnish the Qatari reputation at the expense of Egypt. Whole other story. Okay, you say, so what? The concern is that these individuals had access to top secret information for which they were not cleared, and may have used this information in a manner that harmed Israel's national security interests. 2 aides have been arrested, and the investigation was authorized by none other than Shin Bet head Ronen Bar, the investigating authority, the Shin Bet. Suddenly, with all the pressures Israel faces, firing Ronen Bar became the most pressing matter that Prime Minister Netanyahu had to deal with. And so, he did, with immediate effect. He fired Ronen Bar summarily. This was 2-3 weeks ago. Enter Gali Baharav Miara, the Attorney General of Israel, who is much loathed openly by the current government. They also want to fire her and have said so publicly. The Attorney General said, hang on, you have the legal authority to fire Ronen Bar, but only after certain established protocols, procedures, and practices have been followed and fulfilled. And you haven't done that. The government said, nope, we don't agree with you. We can do whatever we want. And so, the Attorney General and others petitioned the Supreme Court of Israel to hear the dispute and opine on whether or not the firing of Ronen Bar was done legally and properly. The hearing into this very sensitive matter was held 1 week ago. Now, this Supreme Court hearing must be considered in the context of larger issues, one of which is the agenda of the coalition government to remake many key state institutions. Those who oppose the current government believe they are fighting tooth and nail to save the democratic nature of the country and Israeli society. Those who are in government and support the government believe that they are doing exactly the same thing and rescuing the institutions of government and society from the morally corrupted, liberal, leftist, elitist cabal that has dominated Israeli government and the judicial system since the nation's founding. Those are the battle lines. Among the most prominent members of the current coalition government, who believes that judicial reform is urgent and long overdue, is member of Knesset Simcha Rothman. A senior member of the Religious Zionist Party, headed by Minister of Finance Bezalel Smotrich, Rothman is also chair of the very powerful Constitutional Law and Justice Committee of the Knesset. He has championed the controversial judicial reform legislation that has been a priority of this government and a very divisive issue in Israeli society. To the opposition and others, Rothman is an overly zealous proponent of judicial reform, which has caused serious rifts in society. Rothman, however, would posit that the split actually is along right-left lines. But that really is an increasingly kind of questionable proposition. Israelis are beyond fatigued, profoundly fatigued. They had almost a year of extreme social unrest arising from the judicial reform legislation in the period leading up to October 7th. And then, of course, there was October 7th and 18 plus months of war since. The social division that set in due to the aggressive manner in which the government worked to push through the judicial reform legislation was a significant contributing factor to October 7th happening at all. And since then, we've had unending war. And recently, Simcha Rothman revved up the judicial reform efforts afresh. In part one of this longer podcast, you will hear the government's version of events on judicial reform, the Qatargate scandal, and more. And you will hear it from Simcha Rothman. Especially with such important issues, I wanted to be sure State of Tel Aviv listeners and viewers had the opportunity to hear a different perspective. And for that, I spoke with Amir Tibon. I will introduce him in part 2 of this podcast, which will drop tomorrow. Now, we go to Simcha Rothman, who I interviewed on Sunday, April 6. We discussed judicial reform, the way in which the committee he chairs handles hostage families, and his views on a deal to secure the release of the 59 hostages remaining in Hamas captivity. Simcha Rothman is viewed by friends and foes alike as being very, very smart and a political force to watch. He's just getting started. So let's get to it. I'm Vivian Berkovich, former Canadian ambassador to Israel. Stay with us. Sunday, April 6, 2025. It's just after 8 a.m. in Vancouver, where I am today. And you, Simcha Rothman, are in Jerusalem, correct?
Yes, I am. And it's
10 hours ahead. So you're just getting ready to go home for dinner, I hope.
So I already know what will happen today.
Tell me. Oh, right, because it happened. Okay. Wow, this is really kind of Twilight Zone living. This time difference kind of kills you, but I'm only here for a few days. So, first of all, how are you? I haven't spoken to you in a while.
Fine. Actually, I think we had a very interesting Knesset time. The Knesset actually started recess now. I'm in the Knesset, but it's less busy than usual. but still busy times. And what's happening outside of the Knesset is even more interesting nowadays. All about what they call judicial reform, but not only judicial reform. There is a very big debate in Israel now about the Israeli Security Agency. A lot of new development there with the chief legal advisor. There will be a hearing at the Supreme Court on Tuesday. Like everything is happening in the ever-growing pace. And of course, international arena. Netanyahu is now on his way to the U.S. about the new tariffs that the world is talking about. It's a lot is happening.
It's insane. We keep thinking that it might kinda calm down, and it just torques up more and more. But what I wanna focus on with you is as you say, the so-called judicial reform legislation. It was about a week and a half ago that I believe you brought into the Knesset, new legislation that ultimately was approved. An element of the so-called judicial reform legislation was introduced into the Knesset. It passed, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this particular legislation really focused on the judicial appointment process and who is involved in the judicial appointment process and how it's controlled. That's a fair summary, correct?
Yes, and it was now, of course, we offered so what some people would call a compromise or trying to reach a wider consensus. But of course, it's immediately sparked the debate: is it a compromise? Is it a bigger consensus? But yes, it's a little bit different than what was on the table, on the plenum's table on March 23rd, and it's different in few key components. But again, I think we see here it doesn't matter how much the coalition is willing to reach a hand to the opposition or to the protest or whatever, they wouldn't agree with anything. So what can you do? But we are trying to make the system better, and that's what we can do.
So you and I don't agree on many things, but I'll allow that I agree with you on this. I actually think that the compromise that was put forward was quite reasonable. But as we've discussed in the past, I'm a bit of a hard baked cynic with respect to judicial appointments. I think that if you look around the world and you see how they're done, they're politicized everywhere. They It's impossible not to politicize them. So I actually, surprisingly, maybe to you, don't actually wanna get into the weeds of what the changes are. What I wanted to talk about, and this will lead us into some other important issues that you did raise, the broader context of kind of dissent, dissatisfaction, division in Israeli society. And my question is this: after 18 months of war, and we are not, in my view, in a better place domestically than we were on October 6th. If anything, possibly worse. Was this the time to bring forward legislation that you know is going to spark more protests, more dissent? And I just want to anticipate part of what I think your answer might be. I'm not suggesting that you fold and abandon your legislative aims and intentions, not at all. But I do think that the state is under so much pressure now that this is just too much. And as you said, so we have the judicial reform, and then on top of that, we have the so-called Qatargate scandal, which I can explain to our listeners, so we don't have to take the time
If
now.
you can explain, please explain to me
I
because I
can.
don't understand the issue. But
Okay,
yeah,
I will. And wrapped into that, of course, is the firing of the Shin Bet chief, the equivalent of the FBI in Israel. The firing of the Shin Bet chief Ronen Bar by Prime Minister Netanyahu a few weeks ago, which of course is being challenged in the Supreme Court of Israel on April 8th, which is Tuesday, right?
yes, 2 days from
Okay.
now.
So there's just so much going on. And when you have the central government saying, we're firing Ronen Bar, we're firing the head of Shin Bet now. Again, really, do we need that level of confrontation, of conflict, and upheaval now? He's waited 18 months. Could it not wait another few? We've got the war. We've got the Haredi draft issue. It just doesn't let up. So let me try to sort of focus it before I hand over the mic and ask you why. Let's start with judicial reform. Why now?
So first, I cannot be responsible to all the timing of everything that happens in Israel and in the world. Judicial reform is, I can take a lot of responsibility. And if people want to give it to me, I'll take even more. Judicial reform and the timing of the legislation in the Knesset is something that I've been working on, as you said, for more than 2 years now,
Yeah.
3 years. Actually, it's 2 years. The timing of the end of the Knesset session and everything, it's set way before everything started with the head of Shin Bet. So the timing is set. We passed a legislation. We did all the work in the committee, and it goes on the plenum, and it goes on to vote before the Knesset goes into recess. So that's one calendar, if you will.
So to you, it's really a simple administrative response, right?
So first, this legislation does not need to wait because there is a problem with the Shin Bet. It's a different branches of government. People who talk about separation of powers should appreciate the fact that different branches of government work on different calendar. So this is like the formalistic answer, if you will. But I
Okay.
also want to talk about the substance. We are facing the same substance. You said, and you said, of course, people took it to the Supreme Court, the firing of the head of Shin Bet. Not of course. Crazy. No one in his right mind will take this issue to Supreme Court in any other countries that I know of. If the head of the Shin Bet himself thinks his firing is not done legally, he can go to labor court, he can do whatever he wants. The idea that every position in government that the government wants to replace goes to the Supreme Court is part of the problem why we need a judicial reform to begin with. It does not happen in the US. I don't think it would happen in Canada. I don't think it would happen in any other democratic country. The law is very clear about it, and the fact that it goes to the Supreme Court just shows how urgent it is to reform the judiciary and the problems of the judiciary in Israel.
This is going to be a record where I'm going to agree with you on another issue in such quick succession. I agree with you. The
Oh,
whole way in
I
which
don't know what to do that.
the way in which the court process um, functions and is set up in Israel is crazy. And you have a Supreme Court that has kind of allocated to itself, in many ways, powers that aren't set out in a constitution, but have been interpreted by the court to be, in effect, quasi constitutional powers, right? And
Yes.
then you have this madness that I've never understood about the fact that pretty much anyone, any individual who feels they have a legitimate grievance can get before the Supreme Court on an urgent basis, right? So
Yeah, and
that's what
that's
we call standing.
100%.
Yeah,
It's
that's
100% the court's doing. It's as
okay.
nothing in the law that allows.
It's crippling the court. It clogs the court with stuff that should be, if in
And
any
it
court,
clogs the governments.
a
And
much
it's
lower court. But hang on, I want to just sort of stay work with me here. So the fact that the attorney general can go to the Supreme Court and say the firing of Ronen Bar is inappropriate, wrong, contrary to law, all those things. That's part of a much larger issue, right? Which is the way in which our whole court system is constituted and functions.
yes, and that's why you need a judicial reform, and that's why you need to change the way judges are being selected. Because
Okay,
yeah,
we're good on the judges selection part. Okay, I rolled over on that. In terms of judicial reform and the way the whole system works, I agree. I may not agree with you on all of the things you think need to be reformed and how, but I agree we definitely need judicial reform. We also really need a constitution. And in my view, we need a check and balance on the Knesset. But I would also suggest, and we've discussed this previously, that to do that, extreme overhaul of the foundational institutions of the state, a government needs a mandate. And your party Simcha and I get a little scrappy here for a few minutes regarding exactly which parties campaigned on the issue of judicial reform. His position, bottom line, is that judicial reform has been an issue in the last 5 elections, and that it was very much an issue in the previous government that was led by Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid, currently in opposition. My position is that if any government, particularly a coalition comprised of strong niche parties, as we have now in Israel, if any government intends to undertake a deep and comprehensive overhaul of the judicial and constitutional systems and institutions, that they require a very clear and explicit mandate from the people. Israeli campaigns are messy affairs, not the disciplined undertakings that we're used to in the West, where there's a message and operational discipline. I have voted in the last 5 Israeli elections, and I pay very close attention to what is at stake and what is discussed. And I do not agree that the people were presented with coherent policy programs addressing these fundamental issues, in particular, judicial reform. The only party that did so was the Religious Zionist Party. Others may have kind of touched on it here and there, but we were not presented with a policy platform that addressed the overhaul of the main democratic institutions of the State of Israel. And I think that's a problem. Okay, now let's get back to Simcha Rothman. So you feel then that you have the mandate to pursue this judicial reform fully in this government?
First, I feel we have the mandate to do it. Second, the way we did it, that the Judicial Selection Committee will start functioning next Knesset, and not immediately. I think it's even. I don't think it's something that we had to do, but I think it's even makes it even more open to public debate. If next elections, if the opposition wants to campaign on it as they said they would, and saying we will be elected and we will change it back to the way it was, it's a fair play. It's that's democracy. So I think that's it's even more legitimate. But as you can see, the same people who are saying we will run next elections, we will win next elections, and we will undo the changes that you have done, the heads of the opposition parties, those are the same people who ran to court and said, cancel this constitutional amendment as they see it now, immediately. Which means 2 things. One, they don't believe that they will win next elections. Second, they don't believe they will have the power, if they win next elections, to undo it, because the public will not support it, and they will have to put in the coalition parties that think this is a good idea. So they themselves, the opposition themselves, are positive that this amendment is and will enjoy the people's confidence.
So let's move on to, because it's related, let's move on to Ronen Bar, the head of the Shin Bet, who was in office. He's what we call an October 6th official, just as is Prime Minister Netanyahu and pretty much everyone in your government. Ronen Bar is implicated in many of the failures and has also taken responsibility.
In what way? Not only did not take responsibility, he basically said, I'm not going to leave office despite the fact you are firing me.
Exactly.
I don't think that's the meaning of taking responsibility. As someone would use maybe a meme, you keep using the term taking responsibility. I don't really think it means what you think it means. That I would say to Ronen.
Yeah, well, you know what? I would tend to agree with you, because I think that certainly when I grew up and came of age, taking responsibility meant something, and it meant owning and accountability. And that goes right to the top. and that goes to the prime minister. Because when you have an event of such a catastrophic nature as you did on October 7th, it's not any single person's responsibility. I think that there are many people who have failed the people and the state, many, in the IDF, in the intelligence community, and in government. And that's why I continue to be a huge supporter of a state commission of inquiry, which we can joust about some other time. But on the Ronen Bar issue, he has said, I take responsibility for my actions. IDF Chief of Staff, the former IDF Chief of Staff, Herzl Halevi, said, I take responsibility. Former Minister of Defense, Yoav Gallant, said he takes responsibility. Major General Aaron Haliva, who was in charge of the intelligence in the Southern Command, said, I take responsibility. And there are more. And I share your questions. I say, what exactly does that mean? What does that mean? But I'm going to put that to the side. I don't think that the Israeli people are at all satisfied with this kind of bland, formulaic, I take responsibility. Having said that, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is the top of the food chain, has never taken responsibility. And here we are, 18 months later, most of the senior people who were in office on October 6th have either resigned or been told to go home. Ronen Bar is the last one of significance. And he has been saying for months, and I appreciate that he's a prime minister appointment, and he said, I'm not going to go home until the last hostage is back. And the prime minister, for whatever reason, decided in the last few weeks, no, now you're going home. Now I'm firing you and I'm looking for a replacement. And then pretty much immediately after the prime minister did that, the attorney general, who your government also wants to be removed from her post, Gali Barav Miara, the attorney general petitioned to the Supreme Court to reconsider or to consider the legality of Ronen Bar's firing. Correct? We agree on those facts? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Just, yeah, they're pretty neutral, factual base that I just set out. So on Tuesday, the Attorney General of Israel, whose job is, unlike in most other countries, to advise the government, right?
Yes, one of the main reasons we need the judicial reform, besides the courts, is the role of the chief legal advisor or attorney general.
Yeah.
It basically operates also without accountability to anyone. And that's a major problem. If we were in a normal situation, I would say, of course, and not even in a normal situation, of course, Netanyahu is responsible. He's a prime minister, he is responsible. But when you see him trying to fire the head of the Shin Bet, who is in charge, and the attorney general tells him, wait, the Supreme Court will tell you if you can fire the head of the security establishment who is in charge of October 7th, then why does Netanyahu responsible? I really ask you. If he cannot fire the head of the Shin Bet, who is doing a rotten job in his view, he's irresponsible for his wrongdoing. If he cannot fire the head of the chief of staff of the IDF, and then when they fail, is it his responsibility? How can I take responsibility of people's action when I tell them to do something and they refuse and I cannot fire them? I cannot take responsibility on that. So the fact that if our elected officials in office just to take responsibility on someone else wrongdoing that they cannot fire, and if they fire someone from the Supreme Court, will tell them, oh, you have to keep them in office and then take responsibility for their wrongdoings. That's stupid. That's not democracy. That's not accountability. If you want the prime minister to be accountable, you have to let him make mistakes. You fire the people that he thinks is doing the mistakes. You get to hire the people that will make the mistakes, and then giving the responsibility and demand for accountability. You cannot have both ways. You cannot have it. And that's what we have in Israel. That's why we lack responsibility from our elected officials.
So I had a bit of a technical glitch here, and the video recording switched off briefly. But what we covered, what I said next to Simcha, was that I believe that for the good of the nation, we need a state commission of inquiry. And what he is saying is, well, maybe, but we have a totally dysfunctional judicial system anyways. So exactly how will that commission of inquiry be constituted and conducted? So here's where the recording picks up again.
You're 100% correct. But the question is, can an investigative committee that is headed by a Supreme Court justice will be able to say or even consider, listen, the fact that the Supreme Court can be involved in every appointment
Right.
create a problem with the responsibility of elected officials and their ability to do their job. Will an investigative committee that will be appointed by someone who is a major part of the problem, the Chief Justice, will it enjoy the public trust? Will it have the ability to criticize the role of the courts in the mess that we arrived to? So I think not. And that's why we need an investigative committee that is appointed by the people and not by the judges.
If when you say the people, you mean the current coalition government, I'd suggest that there is a very
I don't care for just the current coalition government. It can wait for after the elections and be appointed by the next Knesset, coalition and opposition. I think it's a good idea that it will be appointed by the coalition and opposition. Should it be a parliamentarian investigative committee or another kind of investigative committee? But it cannot be appointed by the court, which is part of the problem.
So I understand that, yes, because typically the way state commissions of inquiry have functioned and operated in the past is, as you're saying, the president of the Israeli Supreme Court takes charge and then appoints the additional members of the state.
Some of the times, but of course the committees that investigated the Second Lebanon War was appointed by the government, by the same government who was involved in Second Lebanon War, and everyone was fine with it, of course, because it wasn't Netanyahu and it wasn't a right-wing government. So the standards are very shaky.
Well, I think the standards are shaky for some legitimate reasons too. And whether we agree on how we got here, I think that it's an absolute truth that we have a crisis of public confidence in our national institutions at the moment. And
Sure.
it's left to right and everything in between. I happen to be of the view, and you've seen the same polling data that I have, I'm of the view that the most recent sort of tranche, if I can use that antiseptic word, of hostage releases really shook the nation, including the right wing, to its core. Because we saw shifts in public opinion with respect to, do we continue with the war or do we get the hostages out and then continue with the war? Because you can't do both at the same time.
Well, I don't agree with you,
okay,
but okay.
So hold that thought. Let's do that. I want to finish up, please, with the April 8th and the Ronen Bar. Because on Tuesday, it's going to the Supreme Court. They're going to have a hearing, and Bezalel Smotrich, the Minister of Finance, and your direct boss in the Religious Zionist Party, has publicly stated on more than one occasion that it may be that the government, if it does not agree with the finding of the Supreme Court, will not follow its decision or abide by its order. Do you agree with that? I mean, do you agree that that statement has been made, first of all?
I don't know what exact terms he used and how is the right way to translate it to English, but I can speak on my own behalf.
Okay.
I don't need to speak on someone else's behalf. I think that in a democratic country with the rule of law, everyone must follow the law, including, and first and foremost, the Supreme Court. And when that does not happen, we have a problem. We have a problem if the court does not follow the law. And the law is extremely, extremely clear on that matter twice. First time, the law is clear that the government can fire the head of the Shin Bet. extremely clear. It said it specifically, including talking about this situation of investigation against a prime minister by the Shin Bet and then firing the head of the Shin Bet. It was discussed in detail when the law was legislated in the committee years ago. It's very clear what the law says, one time. And second time, it says that in the law that we passed in this Knesset, that the court cannot second guess the government's decision if it thinks that it is unreasonable, only if it's against the law. And the court, if the court will intervene in this matter, he will breach two laws. First, the law of the Shin Bet, and second, the law of the judiciary, which says that they cannot do it. So if the court will abide the law, we will have no problem. If the court will say the law is not binding to me, we have a crisis. And I really hope the court will not bring Israel to this kind of crisis.
So when you say that the law is very clear and you referred to the law of Shin Bet, what's the law?
Yeah, Chok HaShabak, the law of the Shin Bet,
Okay.
that says the head of the Shin Bet can be fired by the government, and he's under the supervision and under the authority of the government through the prime minister. Very, very, very clear. And again, this situation was raised. Someone, when they legislated it, they said, what will happen if the Shin Bet will have to investigate some people connected to the prime minister? Do you really want the government to have the ability to fire him? The answer is yes. And it was legislated. Before we go to first principles of democracy, rule of law, and separation of powers,
Right.
to have a secret police that operates without, and it's not under the authority of elected officials, that by definition is not a democracy. When you have a secret police who is the head of the secret police, is operating on his own will without and is not under the authority of the elected officials elected by the people, that's Soviet Union, that's KGB, that's not a democratic country. And no democratic country can accept it. And it's supposed to be first principle. Every lawyer, every judge, every politician, and every citizen understands.
So the government can fire, according to the Shin Bet law, the head of the Shin Bet, which it also
Yeah.
appoints. Why now? He's had 18 months. Why now?
First, I have two answers. First, none of your business. Meaning, if you talk to me about it legally, none of your business. If you question why does the executive branch does something as a matter of law, it's none of your business. If you ask it to answer the public as part of answering the public, not in the court of law, I think the answer was given. The answer is that Prime Minister Netanyahu asked Ronen Bar, the head of the Shin Bet, to give him the inside investigation of October 7th. He gave him a date. He let him finish those checks. And after the inside investigation by the Shin Bet was finished, then he said, okay, so now thank you very much for your service. I'm looking for someone else, which is 100% legitimate way to act. So that's the public answer. But it's irrelevant to the question in the court of law. And if it will be relevant to the question in the court of law, that's the end of democracy and the rule of law, right? The legal basis says that the Shin Bet is under the authority of the government, and the government can fire the head of the Shin Bet whenever they see fit. That's the legal answer. The public answer, I will give you a public answer. And there is a reason why I'm making this a wall of separation.
Right.
Because no other court of law in the world will have this case heard. And we're so crazy in Israel to have this debate that should happen in the public sphere to have it in the courts. We are a crazy country by having this debate on the legal issue. I don't want to talk about the legal issue And my point in my political life is to make sure that the public law questions are in one place and the public policy are being decided by the body politic of Israel, you, the citizens. I don't have to answer to the court, and it's extremely, extremely different. I will answer to you because I owe you an answer.
So we have a situation and we have a society in extreme distress, in my view. Some are saying that it's irreconcilable, almost like a divorce. Some are saying we're on the brink of civil war, in a real pickle. Many people are wondering, and a lot of them your constituents as well, why are we engaging in this fight over Ronan Bar now? Bear with me for a moment, okay? Why do I raise that? Because we had the release of all of the hostages over a 6-week period. And then the ceasefire ended. There were no real continuing negotiations. And the decision was made after a 2-week period when Israel was trying to restart the negotiations to get some movement, and Hamas, in my view, remained intractable. The decision was made, all right, we're going back to war. We're going to continue to attack Hamas, and it's only through military pressure we are going to bring home the hostages. Fair?
Yes, but I think that that was the way. My position was not accepted by the government, by the cabinet. I thought that it was a mistake to have the negotiations to begin with. I thought that we are making a terrible mistake by allowing Hamas to regroup and have those days of ceasefire and have all these supplies come in. I think it was a huge mistake that endangered the hostages that are in Gaza today.
So, and you and your party, I believe, have been consistent in that regard, right? You have been
Yes.
saying, and I think it's important to point.
No, I was even more consistent than my party, but yes.
Okay, but I'm trying to impose.
I was against the first deal to begin with in November 23rd,
So
23.
okay, so you're super hardcore then. With respect to whatever happened and you were for or against, here we are. We find ourselves in this place. I want to make very clear to our listeners and viewers that your party, religious Zionist party, um, your voters are um, they serve in the army. They tend to work. I mean, there's a very big difference between the typical religious Zionist voter and the ultra-Orthodox, what we call Haredi in Israel. And many people in North America and in Europe, where our listeners and viewers are, don't understand that fully. So I want to make that very clear. Your voters, they serve. Your voters have fallen in disproportionate numbers in Gaza and in the north. And I'm really interested in understanding because, and I'm genuinely kind of flummoxed by this. When I look at polls, when I read what's out there and listen on TV, I'm sure you'll say I watch all the wrong TV channels, but that's okay. Um, there seems to be some disquiet even among the religious Zionist constituency with respect to what to do now. Do we continue with the war and refuse to negotiate, or do we try to get the hostages out through negotiation? And I think that a lot of that stems from the horrific sights we saw over that 6-week period when the hostages were released, the grotesque propaganda stages and films, and the additional information that's become very public now with respect to the beyond barbaric conditions in which our men are being held and how they're being tortured. And I think that that tugged at the heartstrings of the nation, and frankly, including many religious Zionist voters. Am I wrong in that perception?
First, the majority of the religious Zionist in society are supporting the views that I just said before, against hostage deal, support to continue the war, believe that only pressure, military pressure, ever increasing military pressure will bring the hostages back. That's the majority of the religious Zionist public, which, by the way, is greater than our voters group. So Not all religious Zionist people vote for us. So in that matter, we represent our public and our constituency very well on that matter. Some of them, I have to say, do say, okay, if Netanyahu, before we go back to full scale war, can get like a few more hostages back, then by all means let him try. But they know the limited scope that this kind of policy can achieve. So that's about where the public is. But even when we're talking about the entire public of Israel, the general public, the general polls, we have a very interesting situation. Because if you ask people, do you support Trump's approach? Meaning, give the Hamas a date, tell them if all the hostages are back until then, by all means, we'll find a solution. If not, gates of hell will open upon your heads. You have major support to this view. Like more than 60% of the public in Israel says, let's do it. Interesting. But most people understand that the government is either is not willing to go there, or there is a legal problem with this aspect, although it won't work. They don't believe this approach will work. If they would think this approach will work and the government is willing to do it, they're for it. But they don't have the trust. You said earlier, we have a problem with trust in the government, in the IDF, in the Shin Bet, whatever, all entities of the Supreme Court. So people say, you can't do Trump program, so go to a deal and let's be done with it. So the public in Israel is a little bit confused on that matter, because they basically say two opposing views. They say we are for Trump's solution, but we're also for a deal with Hamas and ending the war. And of course, those two approaches contradict each other. I do believe, and the public that I serve and my voters believe that Trump's approach is the right way, and I am pushing for it with all the power that I have, political power, and I think that's the only way that we'll get the hostages.
You make the comment that the public is confused. I think the public is also exhausted. And I think that's really important for all public officials to recognize, particularly as we have new rounds of call-up notices going out to reservists who have served, many of them, as you know, over 200 days. We have many from the religious Zionist community in their late 40s and 50s going and stepping up into combat roles, and some tragically have fallen in battle, and that just should not be happening. And that, of course, segues into the draft issue, the draft law or the non-draft law, but we're not going to do that today. We've done it a bit in the past. We're going to do it another day because that's a bag of snakes, and we need time to really pick it apart. So I want to stay focused on the way in which to deal with the hostages and Hamas, and you have been very consistent on that from day one. But what you're saying today is the only way that we have a chance of rescuing any hostages is by continuing to show force and militarily pound Hamas. Inelegant, perhaps, but is that correct from your point of view?
Yes, and I think, but in order for this method to succeed,
Yeah,
we need to have the real gates of hell opening. Not to do it in a gentle way,
right.
not to do it in a step by step, to open the gates of hell, full scale attack on all fronts of Hamas in the same time. We did it in the first day. It was a very shock and awe. I hope we have more in the future for that with that fact. And I think we already see people in Gaza that understand that Hamas is gone. Suddenly you see demonstrations against Hamas. It can bring intel on where the hostages are. It can bring hostages where Hamas operatives are. It can help, and I think we should continue it. and make it stronger and stronger and stronger. And I believe that's the only way we'll get all the hostages back. But I do think that if we would be with this approach from day one,
Right.
we by now would have more hostages back and maybe all.
You, particularly as a result of some of your committee appearances and the committee that you had, I believe it's the Constitutional Law and Justice. You and others in the government have been criticized quite heavily for the manner in which you have spoken to hostage families, treated them in committee. Explain to people who are watching and listening why you've behaved as you have. And I'm assuming that whatever way in which you've spoken to hostage families or addressed them in committee hearings is justified from your perspective. So I want to give you the platform to actually really explain your approach from your perspective, because I think people should hear it.
So first, unlike some other people, coalition and opposition, who have videos of them shouting hostages' families or families who lost their loved ones or criticizing them, you will never find a video of me doing it because I never did. What I did do is have two very strict rules in the committee, meaning I let hostages speak, hostages' families and families of mishpachot shakulot, families who lost their loved ones in the battle or in any other way, speak in the committee, almost without limits. Only two limits. One limit is sometimes time. He said, listen, we have a committee hearing. I have 15 minutes. I will let anyone who wants to speak. And whenever I say 15 minutes, it will extend actually to half an hour. But everything must reach an end. I have to continue to do the job that I am there to do. And some of them did not like it. Some of them started shouting. And I'm not judging them. They're in a very delicate situation. Some of them are traumatized. I don't judge them, but I have to do my job. And I tell them, listen, I'm sorry, the time is up. And if they continue and fight and say, you won't have this committee today, we won't allow it, then I say, listen, I'm sorry, I'm taking a break. And I'm asking the Knesset guard, I'm saying them, listen, I'm telling them, listen, I have to return and do my job and legislate or pass the resolutions that needs to be passed. Please ask them to leave. And usually they leave politely. Sometimes they shout, but usually I'm not at the room even when there is a conflict with them and the Knesset guard. But it's purely on a time issue. And I think that's my job. I must do my job. It's not something that I cannot have the Knesset and the committee canceled because a family wants to speak for an hour. It's sad, but that's what we can do. And so I give them as much as I can, sometimes way more than what I can, but that's one limit. As the second limit is I don't allow even a hostage family to curse or to shout at another hostage family. Sometimes they curse me. They use very bad words, me and other Knesset members present in the room or do not present. And again, I never judge them. I never tell them what he said is unacceptable. I never tell them anything. But if they do it to other members of the hostages' family present in the room or people who lost their loved one, I tell them, listen, you cannot do it. I don't allow it. And I stop them. One of the famous cases is someone is doing it many times. He's coming to the Knesset. Again, I never judge him. Even now, I can't pass judgment on him. But I cannot allow him to attack other hostages' families who are suffering just the same and cannot handle it. So I tell him, listen, you cannot talk like this. And if you will continue, I will stop the committee and I'll ask the Knesset guard to escort you out. Sadly, again, it's 2 or 3 people that behave that way. One of them actually injured members of the Knesset guard, was very violent, was removed from the building for violence a few times. And again, no judgment, but that I have to keep order in my committee. I never, ever, and if someone have a video showing it, and the videos that are very specifically aimed to create a false image, there are people shouting at me when I'm not in the room, and they take the picture of them shouting at me as if I said something. I'm not even in the room. Sometimes the room is empty, and they take a video shouting at me, how can you not listen to me? I'm not even there. And that's shameful. I think that there are members of the opposition and members of the media who have a reason to badmouth the coalition or to badmouth me specifically. That's why they do it. And they never show the hostages' families from the right and from the left who come, hug me, speak to me, say openly, with open mind. This is the only committee when they let us speak, that they tell in the committee that even if they forgot or missed their time, I am asking them by myself, would you come and talk? Because I think that the fact that they are talking to the Knesset committee is important. But again, everything has to be limited in some way. Otherwise, we won't be able to do any work and get the state of Israel to a better position, so the hostages do return to a functioning country with a functioning Knesset and a functioning law system.
And in my view, this hostage issue is tearing the country apart in many ways, emotionally. And I really hope that it's resolved so soon, because we need it and we need a way forward. I want to thank you, Simcha, for taking the time. It's a very busy time of year. I know you got to get home and continue with the house cleaning, getting ready for Pesach. Thank you. And thank you for being so open and candid, because as you and I have discussed on many occasions, the fact that we may disagree on many issues, but never on all issues, what's most important in my view is that we can have this discussion and that we have it, and this is something that all societies are just losing and have lost, is the ability to discuss disagreements civilly, professionally, and respectfully. And for that, I'm really grateful. And I will, as you know, be criticized for giving you a platform. And I'm prepared to deal with that, because I give all kinds of people platforms. And I work hard to do that from left to right. But you're an important voice. I wish you a happy cleaning and a Chag Sameach.
Thank you.
And
Thank you. Pesach kasher v'sameach.
Pesach kasher v'sameach. Thank you so much. As always, thanks for being here. Please tune in tomorrow for a very different perspective, when I discuss Qatargate and the Supreme Court challenge with respect to the firing of Ronen Bar with journalist, author, Haaretz diplomatic correspondent, and my good friend, Amir Tibon. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thanks for being here. We love hearing from you, so please comment on our website, stateoftelaviv.com, or send us a note to hello@stateoftelaviv.com. On behalf of the State of Tel Aviv core team, Yon Zabo, our creative, graphic, visual, and marketing man, Amir White, producer and editor extraordinaire, sound guy, who is also impressively patient with me and my boomer tech deficiencies, and our social media manager, who pitches in on everything, Maya Naftalin. Thanks to the team. Thanks to you for being here. We'll be back soon.